Breaking news. Europe must defend itself against Putin and Trump's threats from the East and West. The liberation of Western Europe began with the D-Day landings in 1944, and on June 6, Europe will commemorate the 80th anniversary of those events. On the other hand, this summer will see the non-celebration of yet another round anniversary, a major setback. The idea of an EDC was voted out of existence on August 30, 1954, in France's National Assembly. European security was based on NATO, which is led by the United States, while European integration revolved around the economic community that is still at the heart of the EU. But now that U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump has threatened to pull the country away from the West and Russian President Vladimir Putin is moving in from the East, the notion of Europe protecting itself needs to be reconsidered. Although the historical context was obviously extremely different 70 years ago, some intriguing resonances remain. A belligerent Russia was a major factor in the European defense initiative both then and now. Another factor, similar to today, was the U.S. desire to direct its attention away from China and toward Asian challenges, specifically the Korean War that started in 1950. The treaty establishing the EDC was inked in 1952, during the height of the war. The future of the German military was a major concern both then and now. For reasons that were crystal clear in French, the reasons why the French Parliament rejected the EDC were too much integration and too little England, as former Prime Minister Pierre Mendès France put it. Could something be learned from that as well? There is no longer a singular, coherent EU entity that might spearhead a European defense initiative. It was the path that was omitted 70 years ago. In its place, there would be a European defense community, the capital letters D and C, that links the current NATO military operational core with European, bilateral, and national capabilities. The answer is both incredibly complex and yet simple when you ask what the current structures of European security are. An incomprehensible maze of acronyms and monikers has emerged as a consequence of various efforts to fortify European defense. Considering the St. Malo Statement, the Berlin Plus Agreement, PESCO, EDF, EPF, ASAP, and ADERPA, how will SHAPE collaborate with CJEF and JEF? Are you eager to find out? Also, it's not complicated in the least. The United States remains Europe's primary defense partner, even after 80 years after D-Day. To rephrase, the fate of Europe's defense is in the hands of NATO, and the fate of NATO is in the hands of the credibility of the U.S. Article 5 promise. The deterrent industry uses credibility in the same way that the financial markets rely on confidence. Specifically, in the event of an assault on one of its allies, a NATO member is only obligated to take such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force under Article 5. If Trump does not deem it necessary to support Estonia, then where does Europe stand? Even before then, if Putin realizes he was wrong about Washington doing what he said it would, like he did with Ukraine, he may no longer believe it. If Trump were to surprise anyone, it would be by removing Ukraine's support. For this reason, Europe must immediately enhance its training programs for the Ukrainian army and its supply of weapons and ammunition if Kyiv is to be able to do more than just hold its present territory in 2025. Even if Trump attempts to negotiate a settlement with Putin over Ukraine's head and pulls the brakes on U.S. backing, this should still be Europe's ambition. As a second point, Europe needs to beef up its conventional defenses. The second Trump presidency is different than the first in that it is being meticulously planned by amiable think tanks. One important objective, according to the Heritage Foundation's Presidential Transition Project for 2025, is to transform NATO so that U.S. allies are capable of fielding the great majority of the conventional forces required to deter Russia while relying on the United States primarily for our nuclear deterrent and select other capabilities, while reducing the U.S. force posture in Europe. To be really forthright, isn't this a fair request? The question remains, even after 80 years since D-Day, why does a continent with a comparable-sized economy continue to rely so substantially on the United States for its security? The defense industry in Europe is not receiving large enough orders from arms manufacturers at a fast enough pace to justify ramping up production in a market economy. Also, it's a veritable menagerie of weapons, as the Ukrainian military have learned the hard way. According to research presented at the 2016 Munich Security Conference, European armies possessed 178 different types of main weapon systems, while American forces possessed only 30. In reality, the United States would benefit from higher European defense investment as well. The art of the deal. Businessman Trump should hear this argument from NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who made the point last month in a speech to the Heritage Foundation that U.S. armaments makers have already won European orders totaling $120 billion over the last 2 years. What if Trump's actions damage the confidence of American nuclear deterrent safeguarding the Baltic states? That would be a Force 9 shock. Despite how implausible it is, we must give greater consideration to nuclear deterrent in Europe. Although the final say rests with the British Prime Minister, the 1962 Nassau Agreement does place Britain's somewhat clumsy old nuclear deterrent at NATO's disposal, which theoretically also means for the defense of the Baltic states. The president will extend his nuclear umbrella over whomever the French president decides, according to their nuclear doctrine. In 1939, a French newspaper article famously headlined Mourir pour Danzig. The piece argued that French soldiers ought not to be asked to die for what was then known as the Free City of Danzig, which is now Gdansk. The current query would be Mourir pour Narva, with Narva being a city in Estonia that is located directly on the border with Russia. Among the European powers, not a single one has a nuclear weapon. Here are 3 tiers of Trump shock, listed not only by severity but also by likelihood. Here should be Europe's top priorities. Ukraine must be prioritized. Secondly, conventional defense must be adequately funded and improved. Lastly, the nuclear deterrence ladder must be carefully considered. Every nation, organization, and trend must overcome its own shadow if any of this is to be accomplished. Despite how politically challenging it may be, European defense procurement must curb its fixation on national pride. Greater cooperation between the United Kingdom and its continental European allies is required. A more cooperative partnership is required between the two Brussels-based behemoths, the European Union and NATO. Recognizing that a stronger NATO with a more European focus is the sole plausible military foundation for a strong European defense community in the present day, Gaullists and Atlanticists should work together to find common ground. On the 70th anniversary of a historic failure, maybe someone wants to organize a conference to talk about all these things? Theme of the conference: Be ready, not afraid. Guess we might say that 2023 was a bit of a bust. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, had assured us, following the whirlwind tenures of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, that we would have a government that is competent, professional, honest, and accountable. Do you recall Liz? She appears like a relic from a bygone era of stand-up comedy these days. In contrast, Sunak further immersed us in the conservative psychodrama through the Looking Glass. Outside of this area, things have not looked well. A large portion of the American public currently favors Donald Trump for re-election as president. The conflict in Ukraine shows no signs of ending. All too obvious is the risk that the rest of the globe will get weary of fighting and lose interest. Additionally, there is the climatic catastrophe, the Middle Eastern war, and so on. However, fresh optimism is brought about by the turn of the year. UK and US elections are among several happening around the world. We must have faith in transformation. That a better option does exist. Our reporting feels particularly essential now, and The Guardian will keep covering developments from across the globe. However, supporting a news-collecting organization is not a walk in the park. This year, I'm requesting monetary contributions from those of you who are able to do so. Not to me personally, but that's okay. The Guardian, though, is another matter entirely. Your choice to support open, independent journalism is what matters most. Regardless of the amount you give, the average monthly support in Bangladesh is roughly $4. By contributing, you can help us make our journalism accessible to all. Never before has any of our commentary or news articles been hidden behind a paywall. You are absolutely essential to our success. When we say we're in this together, Unlike our politicians, we really mean it. I hope you have a wonderful new year.